The briefing is brought to you in association with Spain. From the wilds of the Atlantic to the warmth of Mediterranean isles, the Spanish coast has something for every occasion. And whether chartering a yacht or renting a more modest motorboat, there's no better way to explore this magical country's lesser-known highlights than from the open water. Listen out for a new summer season of The Concierge on Monocle Radio. Join Robert Bound and friends as they turn navigator for an unforgettable journey along the Spanish coast. From hidden gems to legendary gastronomy, and with the unique drama of the America's Cup in the host city of Barcelona added to the mix, discover why the time is right to take to the waves. The Concierge, returning to Monocle Radio in July. This summer, set sail for Spain.
You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 28th of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme, Israel launches its most expansive operation on the West Bank since the Second Intifada. Later in the show, are Turkey and the EU speaking to each other again? Also ahead, Japan announces a dramatic upscaling of its Coast Guard. And finally...
Beetlejuice. No, Astrid! I am serious! If you say his name 3 times... he will appear. Beetlejuice.
The juice is loose.
We'll be hearing from Italy as Tim Burton's Beetlejuice opens this year's Venice Film Festival. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. Israel has launched a major operation in the West Bank targeting at least 4 Palestinian cities, Tubas, Nablus, Tulkarm and Jenin. This follows yesterday's Israeli airstrike on what it claimed was a terrorist command centre near Tulkarm. At least 9 Palestinians have been reported killed in what Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz has described as assaults on Iranian Islamic terror structures. I'm joined with more on this by Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow at Chatham House and a lecturer in international relations at the University of Roehampton. Yossi, first of all, when Israel Katz talks about Iranian Islamic terror structures, do we know exactly what he means?
Good afternoon, Andrew. Not exactly, but I think this is the kind of the speak from the Israeli government. Every Islamic movement is directly connected to Tehran, whether it's true or not, but there are connection between Islamic Jihad, between Hamas and Iran. Whether in this case those are Iranian linked, it's a movement. It's a different question, but they are definitely not proxies of Iran. Nevertheless, they are very active, and I think the tensions are over the last 10 months. This is not the first airstrike. There were to the best of my memory, more than 60 airstrikes since October, whether by drones, helicopters, or even fighter jets.
All of which is true, but this does seem like a significant stepping up in operations on the West Bank. Just going back, though, to this idea of Iranian Islamic terror structures, as Israel Katz put it, Hamas in particular are mostly, obviously, closely associated with Gaza, but do they have much of a presence and much of a following on the West Bank?
They do, and this is not new. There is a Hamas, not only of militants, but also political structure, Hamas political structure. They don't always ideologically, politically, completely identified with Hamas Gaza. There are definitely nuances there. I think what is more worrying from Israel's point of view, beyond the can try to link it with Tehran, is the fact that some of this movement, whether it's the Lions Dance in Nablus or the Jenin Brigades, that are actually very organic. They develop organically from within the West Bank long before October 7. Actually, the fear before October 7 was of an uprising in the West Bank, one of the reasons that Israel was so surprised in Gaza.
I mean, has Israel also been surprised, and should we generally be more surprised that there hasn't been a large-scale uprising on the West Bank since October 7th?
In a way, you can say that because, the occupation goes back as far as 1967. There already been two intifadas, major uprisings. At the same time, Palestinians in the West Bank also know the price for it. The cooperation between the Palestinian security forces and the Israeli security forces that still operates right now very, very efficiently. Bear in mind that where Israel operated last night and still operating, this is what part of Area A that's supposed to be in complete control of the Palestinian Authority, which means the boundaries between the areas that Israel should have control and Palestinian Authority has complete control, completely blurred, and Israel operates freely in these parts of the West Bank too.
In general, though, does Israel regard the West Bank as a different kind of threat than it does Gaza? Because, of course, they have taken a very different approach to both over recent years, withdrawing settlers from Gaza and basically abandoning it to Hamas while continuing to expand settlements on the West Bank.
Yeah, I think the decision to withdraw back in 2005 signified that Israel has no intention, at least at the time and until quite recently, to annex Gaza. To the contrary, it wanted to almost rid itself of the burden of controlling Gaza. The West Bank, when you have right now, together with East Jerusalem, 700,000 settlers, and considering the right-wing government that some of it outright said, declares that it wants to annex the West Bank, it's a completely different story. At the same time, the difference since 2006 between Gaza that's controlled by Hamas and the West Bank by the PA and the Fatah movement, that, as I mentioned earlier, is actually cooperating with Israel on maintaining security.
I mean, that idea of Israel annexing the West Bank has been floating around on the wilder fringes of Israeli hyperconservatism for some time. Is it, though, given the degree to which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is beholden to that somewhat eccentric far-right tendency now, is it completely impossible that he might be thinking about actually doing it?
In mind, before the Abraham Accords, there was a talk about annexing 20% of the West Bank. So this is not new. Even before this messianic religious ultranationalist entered government, now they are in the heart of government and they hold Netanyahu to ransom. Without them, the Ben-Gvirs and the Smotriches of this world, he has no government and he is no prime minister and needs to face the corruption trial on his own, not as a prime minister, and that's what he is afraid of. Now, I think we need to take it seriously. Settlements are expanding, more settlers are living in these settlements, and settler violence is ripened. So, under this condition, I think everyone should take very seriously the idea that at least some of the West Bank, if not its in entirety, might be annexed at one point or another.
Yossi Meckelberg at Chatham House, thanks for joining us. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Here is Monocle's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the war with Russia would eventually end in dialogue and that he would present a plan to US President Joe Biden and his two potential successors to end the conflict. He added that Kyiv's 3-week-old incursion into Russia's Kursk region was part of that plan, but that it also comprised other steps on the economic and diplomatic fronts. Japan has issued an emergency warning as the powerful Typhoon Shanshan approaches the southwestern region of the country with heavy rain and strong winds. Authorities issued evacuation orders for more than 800,000 residents in the Kagoshima prefecture. Airlines and rail operators also cancelled some services over the coming days, and Toyota Motors suspended operations at all of its domestic factories. And Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has paused the relationship with U.S. and Canadian embassies in the country. The move comes after their ambassadors criticize his proposed judicial reform, which will see judges, including Supreme Court justices, be elected by popular vote. President Obrador stresses that the freeze was with the embassies themselves and not with the countries. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Carlotta. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It is fully 37 years since Turkey applied to join the European Union, and it is difficult to find anybody who sincerely believes that Turkey will actually join the EU inside the next 370. Possibly for that reason, Turkey has kind of zoned out of a great deal of such EU-related activity in which it might have participated. However, this week Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan will turn up in Brussels at an informal meeting with EU panjandrums, including Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell and, perhaps more intriguingly, Enlargement Commissioner Oliver Vahagli. Well, I'm joined with more on this by Hannah Lucinda Smith, Monocle's Istanbul correspondent. Hannah, as I understand it, this is the first instance of a Turkish foreign minister showing up at something like this for about 5 years. Do we know what this meeting is actually about?
Yeah, so this is the Gymnich. It's the annual informal meeting of the EU's foreign ministers. And it's a kind of get together where they can talk about the issues and the themes that are affecting the bloc. Now, as you say, it is the last time that Turkey joined one of these meetings was back in 2019. The relations were already really strained by then. And at that point, the Turkey's participation in that and other EU meetings was suspended. Now, it's been a really rough period for a number of reasons, principally migration. Of course, Erdogan has used the refugee issue almost as a weapon at points, threatening to open the border. But there are other issues on Europe's plate at the moment for which Turkey is extremely important, not least the conflict in Ukraine and the kind of wider threat of Russia in the region. Turkey is a really important bulwark both for NATO and for the EU on that issue. From Turkey's point of view, it's all about the economy. Turkey's economy has not been going well for years. It's still not going well despite the efforts of a new Treasury team that came in after the elections last year. We've still got incredibly high inflation, a cost of living crisis. And Turkey is desperate to win back foreign investors. And part of that is kind of improving the country's respectability in investors' eyes. And of course, a key part of that is being part of this European club.
I mean, the new minister is relatively new to the role. He's only been in place since June last year. Is he after some sort of fresh start? Has he signalled himself any kind of new approach to the EU?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's generally part of Turkey's overall approach to try and reset relations. This is something that we hear semi-regularly, actually. For example, when Joe Biden took the White House in 2021, we heard Erdogan talking about a fresh page in relations with the US. That didn't come to pass because Joe Biden's team wasn't particularly enthusiastic about that. But the thing is, ultimately, you can have these ministers in Turkey, people like Hakan Fidan, the foreign minister, who is well known and well respected in Western capitals. He was Turkey's spy chief for more than a decade. So he's already kind of known in the EU and also in the US. But ultimately, Erdogan pulls the strings, particularly since 2018, when we had the change from the parliamentary system to the presidential system. Increasingly, Erdogan has personal controls over the ministries. And it doesn't matter how much effort his ministers put into building these relations. If Erdogan decides at any point that it's more in his favour to blow up those relations, that's what he'll do.
All that being the case, has anything at all actually shifted in terms of Turkey's progress towards the EU, which it is theoretically still a candidate nation for? Is that still a live issue in Turkey at all?
No, I mean, everyone in Turkey knows that this is not going to happen. And you talk to analysts as well. They know it's not going to happen. And the EU knows it's not going to happen. Even when was it, 2016, when there was talk of a visa-free travel in the Schengen zone for Turks. That was agreed, and then that fell apart. It is just not going to happen. However, Turkey is going to continue having a relationship with the EU. And something that a lot of analysts talk about is a recalibration in that relation. They say that actually it does no good for anyone to carry on talking about Turkish membership. It's just something that's going to breed resentment. What we should talk about instead is a recalibration of those relations, particularly in terms of economics, in terms of trade, and perhaps also in terms of visas. But yeah, absolutely. The idea that Turkey is going to be a member, that's been dead in the water for a really long time.
Hannah Lucinda Smith in Istanbul, thank you. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio, and the 2024 Paralympics Games begin today in Paris. Just as in the Olympic Games, one multinational team will compete representing the world's refugees. 8 refugee athletes and 1 guide runner will compete in Paris. Well, I'm joined now with more on this by Paula Baracina Esteban, who is the spokesperson for the UNHCR, the UN's refugee agency in France. Paula, we spoke quite recently in Paris about the refugee team competing in the Olympic Games. When you reflect on their experience, what do you take away from that?
Well, we take away a lot of hope because both the refugee Olympic team and the refugee Paralympic team represent hope, they represent strength, they represent resilience. So as the refugee Olympic team did 2 weeks ago, the refugee Paralympic team is ready to compete. They're ready to win, and they're ready to represent over 120 million displaced persons worldwide in a moment where the world is witnessing conflicts, and it's a moment where there are a lot of humanitarian emergencies worldwide. This team really represents hope for all those displaced persons around the world, who will hopefully feel represented by this beautiful team full of wonderful athletes ready to give their best.
Well, this year among the Paralympics team, I mean, it's not a big team, but who are some of those athletes?
So there's 8 athletes and 2 guide runners coming from different countries, and they are just wonderful. For example, Sakia, who is competing tomorrow, she's the only woman in the team actually, and she's competing in para taekwondo. So she's very charismatic. She's had a life that has demonstrated a lot of strength, a lot of perseverance to really achieve her dreams. She always says her dream was to compete in the Paralympics, and here she is, and she has a good chance to win a medal, we hope, tomorrow. There's also Ibrahim, who's competing in the triathlon. There is also Hadi, who's also competing in para taekwondo, and he was the first refugee para taekwondo athlete ever in the world. So there is Emilio as well, who's competing in wheelchair fencing. So it's 8 athletes and 2 guide runners who are full of strength, full of hope, and who have stories of resilience. And their journey is a journey really of strength, of bravery, and of never giving up. And as any other athlete here, they want to win, and they want to do their best.
We talked about the idea of the athlete stories a bit in Paris as well, and I guess the same applies here, that you talk about that enormous number of people are displaced worldwide, and that a number that big doesn't really make much sense to anybody. But if you can pull out of that these individual stories, then I guess people can understand what's at stake here. Does this make the UNHCR's job easier? Do you find it actually helps if you can get people to understand that each one of these 120 million people is an individual?
Well, this is exactly what you mentioned. We always speak about numbers. Over 120 million persons are displaced worldwide. What does that mean? That's actually over 120 million individual stories, individual lives. And that's what we are here to tell as well, that 8 of them are competing, but it speaks to the importance of speaking about the individual stories, because every displaced person worldwide has an amazing story to tell and a very inspiring story to tell, whether they are athletes or not. Refugees and displaced persons have to leave everything behind because of conflict, because of persecution. They are very brave to leave the place where they are from. No one leaves their home country, their hometown, willingly, right? There is a very compelling reason, that is to save their own life. And that's something we always have to remember. And that's something that everyone should try to keep in their mind whenever they meet a refugee, a displaced person, know that that person is very courageous. They have left everything behind with hope to start a better life elsewhere, but because they had no other choice.
Just finally and briefly, obviously in an ideal world it would not be possible to select a refugee team for any games, because in an ideal world there wouldn't be any refugees, but that doesn't appear like it's going to dawn anytime soon. That being the case, do you hope that for future Olympic and Paralympic Games the refugee team can expand, that this experiment can be furthered?
So, as you just mentioned, and as the High Commissioner Filippo Grandi always says, no, he wishes he had no job, because that would mean peace in the world. And that's very true. But in the current context, yes, of course, should there continue to be refugees in the world, and we hope one day there will not be, but should that continue, then yes, we hope that more and more athletes, refugee athletes, can join the Olympic team, the Paralympic team, that they can have a chance, because that means that they have the support to achieve their dreams. And sports is a very important element for refugees to be included in their communities, to have a better health, mental health, physical health, and to live a normal life. Normality is what all refugees and displaced persons want. So yes, of course, we will continue working with the Olympic Committee, with the Paralympic Committee, to support both teams and to ensure that they can continue competing throughout the years.
Paula Barracina Esteban from the UNHCR, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing. This is The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. Japan's Coast Guard has unveiled plans for a new patrol ship, although the designation patrol ship rather undersells a 200-metre, 30,000-tonne Leviathan which would dwarf many modern warships. It will go to sea circa 2029 and will be able to operate not just as a Coast Guard craft, but as a sort of floating command centre, able to respond to an assortment of crises and deal with a wide variety of responsibilities. I'm joined with more on this by Alessio Patalano, Professor at King's College London and an expert on Asian maritime defence. Alessio, first of all, among Coast Guard forces the world over generally, how unusual is a ship of this size?
So, Andrew, first of all, I'm always delighted to be back on the platform. It is an unusual platform, but then everything is relative to context here, in the sense that already Northeast Asia is home of some of the largest law enforcement maritime agencies on the planet. The Chinese Coast Guard is the largest Coast Guard that we can think of. Is way larger than most navies. The Japanese Coast Guard is actually a very proficient, excellent in terms of quality of platforms and the breadth of platforms, Coast Guard itself. And the Chinese kind of like made a bit of a if you want, a bit of noise, a bit of a splash a few years back when they launched a 12,000-ton Coast Guard Captor, which was a command platform as well. So the choice or the debate in Japan is not coming out of nowhere. It's part of a broader conversation about the centrality of law enforcement at sea and the ability of agencies to deploy capabilities to, keep the challenges at bay, which in the East China Sea, the South China Sea, as we've heard for the past few months constantly on media coverage, it means in part being able to push back on competing claimants that deploy capabilities to basically impose their will on others. So what the Japanese are doing is unusual as a general principle, but not so much out of context when it comes to East Asia, broadly speaking.
I mean, is this a direct response to some of the bigger ships that China's Coast Guard has put to sea, notably the Xiaotao-class patrol ships, which are a hefty craft in themselves, but this new Japanese one will be even bigger?
again, yes, you are absolutely right. That's spot on. But at the same time, you have to understand that there is a connection between land-based projection at sea and activities and operations at sea. We see this every day, whether it is in the South China Sea, in the tensions between China and the Philippines, or across the Strait of Taiwan, or over the last few days in the context of the East China Sea, when just a couple of days ago, a Chinese plane briefly entered the airspace over a group of islands that belong to Japan under Japanese sovereign control. So in that sense, these larger ships tell you something about the complexity of the battle space, if you want, or the maritime domain in East Asia, in which land-based projection capabilities over the maritime domain abound and have to be taken into consideration. So this ship, in part, will be a very large command platform to deploy unmanned vehicles. They have helicopters to conduct more complex operations, but at the same time, coordinate other capabilities in order to be able to do so. And frankly, Andrew, there is also a broader trend here writ large, and it's one in which we started to realize that larger platforms by design actually give you modularity, give you operational flexibility, so they give you option. So this idea that we had in the past that you can only afford a certain type of size of ship, it's a relative concept. If you can do it, given where we are in terms of general trends of complexity of activities at sea, and specifically in East Asia, larger is actually better.
Alessio Patalano, thank you as always for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller, and finally on today's show, the 81st Annual Venice International Film Festival is underway as of today, and joining me now from exactly there is the film critic Karen Krasanovic. Karen, as I understand it, you have just emerged blinking from a cinema right now. What have you been watching?
It's like you were here, Andrew. It's exactly right. I just saw Beetlejuice in the Pala Biennale, which is an enormous sort of aerodrome full of temporary seats. And it's a wonderful screening, and it was quite packed. And we all walked out into the bright sunshine after being in air conditioning. It is really very close here, muggier than last year, but with a lot of buzz. Now, I'm in the press office right now, and you can hear, press area of the casino, and you can hear the press conference going on in the back, and it's always in Italian.
The film itself, was it actually any good?
I think I'm under an embargo for that, but I have to say,
you can blink once for yes, twice for no.
Okay, all I can say is dig out your MacArthur's Park, sung by Richard Harris. It's like that.
So it goes on and on and on for ages and ages and ages, and people really enjoy it when they're having a massive midlife crisis.
I think it's pretty close. I mean, I thought it was silly and delightful, but I've always loved that song and always thought it was mad, and I think Tim Burton used it perfectly. And Michael Keaton is spectacular. The cast is amazing. There are critics I've spoken to who would disagree with me, but I think as a sequel, a long-awaited sequel, I think it's just right.
Well, that, of course, opens the festival, so we can't talk really about what you've seen, because aside from that, you haven't seen anything. But what are you actually most looking forward to?
Well, I'm in a mixed about Disclaimer, which is the TV series by Alfonso Cuarón, which is 8 parts, so it's 8 hours. There's 4 hours tonight, starring Cate Blanchett, who was in front of me on the flight over, which was quite nice. That's the kind of thing that happens here, unlike in Cannes, where the stars are sequestered away. Here you actually see them, as they say, in the wild. And then I've got a really packed schedule for this week. And I'm also really looking forward to tomorrow's Maria by Pablo Larraín, who did Spencer about Diana, and also Jackie O. So it's going to be an interior shot of Maria Callas, played by none other than Angelina Jolie.
The Venice Film Festival itself, though, do you get the sense that it's having a bit of a resurgence? There had been some gossip that its cachet had dimmed a little bit among international film festivals, despite the location.
About maybe 7 years ago, I would have agreed, and I think it was eclipsed by Cannes for a while, but now I really believe that this is the premier European festival. People are starting to ignore Berlin. Cannes is getting, I don't want to say trashy, but it's very wants to pronounce itself. Whereas here you've got a mix of commercial films and you've got a mix of high art house and some more obscure ones that may never get distribution. And also the Lido is glamorous and private, but also it's not full of hubbub. You know, you got to take a boat and a plane to get here and get on the red carpet.
We won't hold you to any predictions you may make, but is there any advance gossip over who or what are likely to stroll off with the big prizes?
Ooh, not really, although The Order by Justin Kurzel is being anticipated. Baby Girl by Helena Regin, I'm not sure I'm saying the name right. And we all think that Wolves, starring George Clooney and Brad Pitt, that's Wolves by John Watts, is going to be terrible but great fun.
Karen Krasanovic in Venice, we will doubtless hear more from you after you've seen some more stuff. Thank you for joining us. That is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Carlotta Rebello. Our researcher was Sana Jumani and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing returns tomorrow at the same time. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.